Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. June turned into a very busy month, so I ended up changing the poll last minute. Instead of the longer, summer-themed ones I put up this month, I asked you to choose between two shorter shows that looked like quick, fairly uncomplicated watches. And the majority of you voted for Tearmoon Empire. I never want to sway the polls one way or the other, but if I'd had to choose, this one probably would have had my vote too. It was a pretty quick, easy watch, but it also had that undercurrent of something darker that tends to draw me in. Our story begins with the Tearmoon Kingdom's downfall, following a famine, an epidemic, and a series of questionable political choices that put the rich first. The ordinary citizens rise up and overthrow the royal family. Spoiled, selfish Princess Mia Luna Tearmoon is thrown in the dungeon, where she spends the next 3 years lectured, taunted, and abused by the people that she treated so poorly when she was in power, with only her diary and one loyal maid for company. Eventually, the day of her execution arrives, and she's taken up to the guillotine platform, where, amidst a sea of people cheering on her demise, she is beheaded. Except, seemingly just a moment later, Mia wakes up in her bedroom in the castle and realizes she's back in the body of her 12-year-old self. Vivid flashbacks of her imprisonment and her blood-soaked diary detailing it all convince her that it wasn't a dream. So Mia sets out to change the future. But it's not easy to outgrow a lifetime of always thinking of yourself first. Though these reforms will better her kingdom, Mia's primary focus is always how best to avoid her fate from the first timeline. She slowly builds herself an inner circle of powerful, influential people within her kingdom, but mostly on accident. Take Ludwig, who becomes her personal financial advisor. He's beyond impressed, during what he thinks is their first meeting, hearing her rant about the state of the kingdom's economy and the effect the royal family's extravagance is having on it. He has no way of knowing, of course, that she's simply spitting back, verbatim, a lecture he berated her with in the first timeline. Ludwig is really the start of her people coming to see her as something akin to a saint. Remembering his judgmental demeanor, she really just wanted the satisfaction of humbling him a bit. But to Ludwig, who's spent years failing to get the noble families to listen to him, someone in such a high position apparently sharing his exact views feels like a literal godsend. And his friendship is an important one. He helps her with the logistics of bolstering the kingdom's poorest district by building a hospital in the center of it. He advises her on how to prepare their country for the famine she knows is coming in a few years, though it's all hypothetical to him, of course. And he is continuously impressed that she's thought through so many possibilities for her kingdom's future. Through a combination of using her old diary as a cheat sheet, and a series of flattering misunderstandings like Ludwig's, Mia comes to be known as the wisdom of the Empire, and the fact that she really hasn't earned that reputation is definitely something we need to talk about. This year has been an interesting one. I feel like what I'm about to say is something I've already said multiple times for other anime I've watched this year. Some variation of, this shouldn't have worked, but it did. I've made it no secret that I'm not a fan of these wish fulfillment plot lines and too perfect main protagonists. As rushed as Charlotte was, I feel like it worked in that show because we did get to see you start from the bottom. And, a little surprisingly, Mia never really got on my nerves either. I think this series works for a couple different reasons. First and foremost, it was always portrayed in a comedic way. The writers never tried to convince us to see her in a kinder light than she deserved. And that's not to say Mia was even particularly unlikable. She's spoiled and self-centered, but not a bad person. She was definitely a lot crueler in her first life, but her experiences in prison and during the revolution did succeed in teaching her a lesson about treating others the way she'd like to be treated. But half the time, the best character was the narrator, who had such a dry way of summing up a scene. He tended to sound so unimpressed with the characters giving Mia more credit than she deserved. That kind of continuous narrator can be really hit or miss for me, but it was a great addition to this story. Speaking of unofficial characters, Tearmoon Empire is one of those shows where the music is practically its own character too. I didn't like it at first. It just felt really overbearing, but it grew on me as the episode went on and I realized it was a purposeful effect, how closely the background music followed the story and conversations. It started to feel almost like the musical equivalent of slapstick comedy. Whenever Mia would be talking to someone and things would stop going her way, the music would start to falter and the notes would go flat. It would start to sound almost like a parody of the song that had been playing. It reminded me of that awful old recorder cover of My Heart Will Go On from Titanic, but in the best way. Sort of on that note, the other characters were another big point in this show's favor. Okay, to be honest, none of them were super deep or memorable. I'd feel a little disingenuous praising them too dramatically, but given this setup, I was pleasantly surprised more often than not. For a cast of characters who do all fall for Mia's undeserved Wisdom of the Empire reputation, none of them felt like fools for doing so, though it's primarily due to their generous misunderstandings. She did have to win them all over. Several times I was convinced we'd finally encountered the character who was going to see through her. They don't lose their personalities once they do befriend her either. Their varied standings and political views really help to bring this world to life in a way Mia couldn't have done on her own. They don't exist solely to worship her, which would have made this whole thing totally insufferable. But it still is kind of unfortunate that no one ever sees through her. I did feel like this story was really itching for that kind of plot twist. As Mia continues on, going away to her elite boarding school and befriending various other nobles and royal heirs she'd made enemies of the first time around, the future laid out for her in her diary slowly starts to change as well, until finally the diary vanishes altogether, seeming to suggest that she's won. Her death at the guillotine is no longer her fate. But this is only the end of episode 8. There's still the final act of the story to get through, and the absence of the diary really didn't change anything the way I'd hoped it would. You'd expect Mia to be lost, now that her roadmap or cheat sheet or whatever you want to call it is gone, because she really hasn't spent much time educating herself on these subjects everyone thinks she's so knowledgeable about. But, as usual, everything just sort of works out, but this would have been the perfect excuse for someone to finally see through her. And I want to be clear that it's not that I was just looking for Mia to be humbled. I liked her just fine, but I can't ignore that almost all her relationships are built on something fake. I would have loved to see her friends see her for who she really is, and accept her anyway. I feel like they had the perfect setup to bring a little more depth to those relationships, and took the easy way out by sticking to the status quo instead. Which isn't to say there's no character development at all. Mia starts up a relationship with a prince from a neighboring country while at school, hoping his kingdom will come to her aid if the revolution does happen again. What begins as a strategic alliance slowly morphs into a genuine crush, the first one she's ever had. The whole thing really was very sweet, and it's the start of an important change for Mia. It's the thing that prompts her to put someone else first for the first time, when suddenly it's Prince Abel's kingdom that's dealing with an uprising in this timeline. I won't get too detailed with that final plotline, though this really isn't the kind of show where I think anyone would be truly worried it would pull some last-minute twist and not have a happy ending. But I wanted to introduce it because I felt like there was another, stronger storyline that was practically gifted to the writers, and I was disappointed it didn't play out the way it could have. The big twist is that, in both timelines, there was this shady organization working behind the scenes to manufacture these revolutions. When Mia got things straightened out so firmly in Tearmoon, they had no choice but to move on to Abel's kingdom instead. And that could have been a good mystery to wrap things up with, but the big reveal moment doesn't have nearly the significance it should have. They really hold on to that original gimmick until the end, but if Mia had grown like I wanted her to, She could have figured out for herself that the conditions in Remno weren't nearly at revolution levels of dysfunction. It could have been a really satisfying reveal, a great plot twist, and the perfect proof of how far she'd come since we first met her. Instead, the audience learns the twist by ending one of the episodes with one of the organization's meetings. They just tell us everything, long before Mia or her friends have any idea there's something more suspicious going on. I won't pretend that didn't disappoint me. I've praised other anime this year for not stretching themselves too thin, focusing in on a few aspects they could do really well rather than covering everything but being mediocre overall. I had the opposite reaction to Tearmoon Empire. I don't dislike this anime. It was fun a lot of the time, and being simple isn't always a bad thing. In this case, it just felt like it would have been so easy to turn it into something bigger and better and deeper, and that sort of takeaway always irks me. It's not a show that I would caution people away from, but I will say if you're interested in this kind of idea, I'd recommend checking out The Royal Tutor. It's minus the reincarnation bit, but the whole spoiled, sheltered royals learning to better understand their kingdom part of it is a lot stronger, while maintaining the same fun, lighthearted tone Tearmoon Empire has a lot of the time. If you enjoyed one, you'll probably like the other. Thank you for watching.